I felt like making a different video than usual this time. So, that's how we've ended up with the best DOS games by year, according to MobyGames. Most of you know the website, it's like the single biggest gaming resource and that's why I'm using it for this one. One game per year, based on Moby score, and if there's a tie, then based on critic score. And if by any chance this tie too, then I will pick the winner. It shouldn't come to that though, and if it does, I'll let you know. Oh, and I'm not including re-releases with DLCs or compilations. And to make sure we understand each other, these are not my choices but MobyGames' users' picks. So, hopefully you like it, and let's see what games were the best for each year. The pick for 1985 by MobyGames users is a Mind Forever Voyaging, a parser text-driven adventure, so a game I wouldn't have picked myself because of my deliberating condition. My incurable allergy to text parsers. It's a struggle that I have to live with, folks. Anyway, it's the grim future of 2031, the world is on the brink of economic collapse and it doesn't look like things are going to change for the better. The president comes up with a 50-year recovery plan, but before putting it in motion, it is decided that it should be simulated to check its validity and effectiveness. To do so, Prism, a first real sentient AI, is used. And you start the game playing as it. 90% of your game time you'll spend in simulation observing and recording everyday happenings in a town of Rockville, and how President's plan gradually changes the lives of citizens. After recording a certain amount of data, you need to pop out of the simulation and review the recordings with Project Leader. When plenty enough recordings have been gathered for set time, you're gonna be able to move 10 years ahead in the simulation to observe the long-term consequences. Rinse and repeat until the simulation is completed. And I don't have to tell you that as you go you'll learn that things are not really as they seem and that the plan is not as idyllic as it might have looked initially. Well, when I said observe and record, I mostly meant read a lot of text, walls worth of it, and input commands using the text parser. So, keep that in mind when deciding if to try a Mind Forever Voyaging out. The game is rather light on puzzles and it's mostly based on experiencing and learning how President's plan changes people and town of Rockville. As stories in adventure games go, it's definitely an interesting one and I would have loved to see it in a point-and-click graphical adventure format rather than this, but it is what it is. Oh, and on a side note, the whole advanced AI computer and president planning to save the world reminds me a little of Salvation, a 2-season sci-fi series I saw on Netflix. Good stuff, even if cancelled prematurely. A notable loser for 1985 that's worth mentioning, so a game that was not picked by MobyGames users and was of excellent quality, would be Ultima 3 Exodus, third and last in the first of Richard Garriott's trilogies and an incredible adventure RPG. In essence, Starflight is a sandbox space exploration, trading and combat game. Yup, all three rolled into one. And what an explosive mixture of fun that is. I'd hate to draw too far-fetched comparisons here, but you could say that it was kinda like Star Trek, where you have no set path to follow, meaning you can divide your time freely between mining, trade, combat and alien diplomacy, and explore to your heart's content, doing what you please, how you please and where you please. As the time passes by, however, an overarching plot slowly emerges and you discover that eons ago there was an ancient race of beings that recently came back and is causing stars to flare, destroying all living creatures. Upon its release, Starflight was a critical success and was universally praised for its quality. It was a very complex game where you had to take many factors into consideration on every step of your adventure. For instance, the crew that you hire at the beginning of the game for various positions on your ship had to be chosen keeping their base stats in mind, so that they would be a good fit for tasks that they would then carry out later on. Those skills could be raised, however, by means of training, so even a misfit in time could be transformed into a valued crew member. Starflight consists of 270 star systems of 800 planets in total, up to 8 per each star. So for the time, it's beyond huge. Perhaps not as big as Elite, but Starflight came out earlier and was gigantic in terms of content and freedom nonetheless. All systems can be entered and planets landed on, even those with gravity over 8G, where your ship would destroy upon landing from stress and structural damage. So like I said, you're free to do what you choose, even die. Starflight is probably the most unusual and interesting title released in 1986 on PC, and I won't dispute MobyGames' pick of it to be the best for the year. It's not for everyone, but it's definitely a title that influenced the whole genre of later space-based games. Ghosts and Goblins is another game worth mentioning, even if it did not steal hearts of MobyGames users. It's a fun fantasy-themed arcade action platformer. Ultima 4 Quest of the Avatar took the cake for 1987. It was also a first in its own series to take more modern game design approach, shifting focus from previous installments' hack-and-slashy feel to a more story-driven big quest type of an adventure. It is also the first title of the Age of the Enlightenment trilogy. The game was much bigger in scope than any of the previous titles, with a map 16 times larger than that of Ultima 3. It contained many puzzle-filled dungeons and tons of additional improvements to dialogue, traveling, exploration, and world interactivity, to name a few. It was, and excuse me the term here, next-gen Ultima. And even though presentation-wise it was still rooted in old and very basic design, with just an extra touch of color, Ultima 4 was seriously advanced and universally beloved title. It kinda is to this day too, and not for no reason. The player creation system was very unusual as well, and something I've not seen until Fallout New Vegas in 2010, I believe. Basically, you're not choosing stats by hand, but are asked series of ethical dilemmas and problems, and based on your answers, you're assigned a class, which was not only unique for the genre, but assured viability for multiple playthroughs, as all classes played a bit different. It is also the first game in the series where you don't have to save the world. There's no huge crisis, and nothing is wrong. On the contrary, former Caesarea, now known as Britannia, is under the rule of series famous Lord British and is a peaceful and prosperous kingdom. You, as a player, are assigned a task of learning the true meaning of 8 fundamental virtues. So honesty, compassion, valor, justice, sacrifice, honor, spirituality, and humility. And as you do that, you're also supposed to get the so-called Codex of Ultimate Wisdom, and eventually become the shining beacon of good for all others, an example to the young and avatar of the nation. While I have nothing against Ultima for grabbing the top spot in '87, it had some serious competition in likes of Arkanoid, which is probably the most famous of all Breakout clones, Elite, a space opera that morphed into my beloved Frontier just a few years later, and Defender of the Crown, Cinemaware's cult mix of strategy and action. All great games and classic titles. Ultima 5 is the 5th title in Richard Garriott's series of role-playing games and a winner at MobyGames' website 2nd year in a row. Once again, your avatar. This time, however, Britannia is not an idyllic country you remember it to be, not in the slightest. Lord British disappeared and the kingdom is ruled by a man called Blackthorn, an evil tyrant that has corrupted the meaning of virtues by blindly applying them upon the will of the people, to enforcing them against their will and their true meanings. He effectively has turned once peaceful Britannia into a grim and shallow version of its former self. He's followed by 3 so-called Shadow Lords that embody the antithesis, the mirrored evil versions of truth, love and courage, so you, the avatar, has to understand the meaning and origins of the corruption, find a way to defeat the Shadow Lords, rescue Lord British, and if that wasn't enough, by doing all that, also restore the true virtues to the Britannia. Ultima uses the same engine as the year prior's game and most of the gameplay mechanics too. So stuff like complex spell system, ability to recruit party members, Moongate teleports, various modes of transportation, and a character creation system as well. This time though, there's only 4 classes you can play as. But Ultima 5 is not just a risking and offers quite a few novelties too. Bigger towns and cities, a vast underworld underground system, Shadow Lords' influence on citizens, making them behave erratically when under evil spell, physical interactions with objects that can be pushed or pulled now, a full day-night cycle, expanded dialogue trees and schedules for NPCs. It was just a bigger and by extension of that arguably better game. Fans of RPGs or even Ultima series would find themselves right at home playing Warriors of Destiny, and those unfamiliar with the genre can also use it as a captivating start-off point into an RPG addiction. With Ultima 5 being the highest scored game for 1988, there had to be some sore losers. And there were pretty amazing titles too. So, Bubble Bobble, one of the best arcade single-screen platformers, Zack McCracken and the Alien Mindbenders, a hilarious sci-fi adventure from LucasArts, Maniac Mansion, arguably even better B-movie slasher adventure, and the game I would have picked for the first spot if I could. And finally, Pool of Radiance, SSI's incredible party-based tactical combat RPG. '89 signified a shift in trends on MobyGames' website that forgot top spots being taken by mostly RPGs in favor of point-and-click adventure games. And this 1989's title is an excellent to be the first of these, as it's an adventure role-playing mixture unlike anything else up to that point. Town of Spielberg is a troubled one. Not only it's surrounded by all kinds of evil and weird creatures, like ogres, goblins, or talking foxes, but it's also raided by brigands, on a regular basis I must add. But if that wasn't enough, ruler of the town, Baron Stefan von Spielberg, had his kids kidnapped, and his jester mysteriously went missing too. So, as you see, living in Spielberg is not easy, even for the rich. Enter you, an adventurer, a hero, a potential savior of the small community. At the beginning of the game you pick a class between three: fighter, mage or thief. And that choice will not only influence the combat, but also many events in the game, puzzles that you'll be solving and even dialogues. Skills and abilities will improve with time too, but only if you'll be using them repeatedly, you know, exactly how they would in real life. And having chosen different ones for each playthrough may result in completely different outcomes of many quests and different ways puzzles can be solved. Hero's Quest is definitely a game worth completing a few times. Unless you're me and hate text parsers with passion, cause unfortunately all your interactions other than combat that takes place on a separate screen will be via typing in commands. And I know that these were the times before the dawn of point and clicking, and adventures just used the formula, but it's not my cup of tea. Hero's Quest also featured a full day-night cycle with NPCs scheduling, meaning that they all were having certain things to do and places to be during different periods of the day, a hunger and tiredness system. So you had to eat and rest not to die. Novel stuff, really. And overall, it was a groundbreaking title that many remember fondly to this very day. But what were the games that stood against fighting for the crown of 1989? Well, SimCity, an awesome city builder and progenitor of a whole new genre. On a side note, I'm testing City Skylines 2 now, and it's a blast. Then there was Wasteland 2, a grandfather of my favorite series of post-apocalyptic RPGs, so Fallouts. 1990 was a year of the monkey. Actually, scratch that, I'm not familiar with Chinese astrology, so it might have not been. But it kinda was anyway, because MobyGames' users picked Secret of the Monkey Island as the best game of the year. And good, because it's by far the best point-and-click adventure of the early 90s, in my opinion. And I will defend that notion for as long as I can, or have to. There were games released before, in the same time, and after, and none came close to this brilliant gem. And I feel that short of much newer Life is Strange Before the Storm and Detroit Become Human titles, Monkey Island is still the best adventure game on any of the systems to date, although entirely different to the newer three I just mentioned. Ron Gilbert is the iconic mastermind behind the monkey's incredible story, and truth be told, most other early Lucasfilm adventure games too. Secret of the Monkey Island places you in the shoes of Guybrush Threepwood, a young pirate wannabe, and he will do anything to become one. Cause you know, follow your dreams, don't give up on them, aim for the target, be the best, blah 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 blah. So he sets out on an adventure that will see him completing series of challenging and often hilarious pirate trials, finding love of his life in definitely least expected place, and fighting against the terrifying ghost pirate LeChuck, who seems to be suffering from a constant constipation judging by how he behaves. The game is filled with humor to the brim, so much so that it's leaking to all aspects of gameplay. So, most puzzles are based on funny interactions either between characters or objects, your tasks/adventures are just out of this world, and situations you'll find yourself in are just comedy magic. Like the now famous sword fighting scene for instance, where you have to defeat the Great Sword Master. Seemingly deadly and undefeated. But, unless you played the game before, you wouldn't know going for it that it's not your typical battle of strength and dexterity, but rather a challenge of witty remarks. Monkey Island looks great, it sounds incredible, I mean, the title tune is an instant earworm, and on top of that, it's incredibly atmospheric and has an amazing, captivating, laughs-filled plot. If you've never played it, pause this video and do so. It's definitely worth it. What games tried but failed to win the 1990? Prince of Persia, a rotoscoping animated platformer. Ultima 6, The False Prophet, first of the modern Ultima titles to get a proper presentation. Wing Commander, a game that's responsible for the Star Citizen fiasco. Silent Service 2, a brilliant early World War II submarine simulation. And finally, Red Baron, World War I flight combat simulation with permadeath and rank progression. Awesome game. As much as I love the series, and I do to bits, I wouldn't have picked Monkey Island 2 LeChuck's Revenge to be the game of 1991 as MobyGames did. For me, it would be one of the runner-ups, but we'll mention them a bit later. Monkey Island 2 is the second outing in the Monkey series, and while perhaps it's not as influential as the first title was, it's still nearly as good and one of the very best point-and-click adventure games ever released. Period. Once again, you're Guybrush Threepwood, who's finally a pirate, so there's that at least. Perhaps one that other pirates laugh at, often right in his face, but a pirate nonetheless. And this time, you're on a quest to find the Big Whoop, a legendary treasure that's said to be bigger, better, more elusive and treasurier than all the riches of the richest. Yep, one of those is not a word, who cares? Anyway, I'm sure that the title gave it away, but once more you'll face the evil LeChuck, this time zombified, brought back to life as an undead by his subordinates. Many things have been improved since the last game, from graphics that have a bit more animated movie look to them, featuring beautiful hand-painted backgrounds and more detailed character sprites, through LucasArts' new iMuse system synchronizing music to the action on the screen, all the way to the modernization of the interface and more cinematic feel of the adventure. The traditional for the series swashbuckling comedy atmosphere is omnipresent and will keep you laughing from start to finish, chuckling at funny jobs in the dialogues or unexpected interactions between the characters. Monkey Island 2, same as its predecessor, is not just a game, it's an experience that all gamers, regardless of what their fave genres are, should dive into at least once. It's worth it. And while it's a Game of the Year by Moby, there were also some other important titles released in 1991, namely Sid Meier's Civilization, a game I would have picked to take the cake as it's one of the most important titles in all of gaming, not just in its own nation-leading 4X historical through the ages strategy genre. Lemmings, a puzzle action classic that stole the hearts of gamers all over the world, and Eye of the Beholder, a first in the series of beloved first-person perspective role-playing games. Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis is what a fourth movie in the indie series should have been. But instead we've got Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which was a bit of a letdown. There's a new one now, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, but I've not seen it yet. I have hopes though. Anyway, Fate of Atlantis is arguably the most ambitious and biggest in scope out of all LucasArts' adventure games at the time of its release. Armed with his iconic whip, unquestionable courage and his troublesome wits, Indy partners up with his old friend, a beautiful red-haired Sophia. Together they must embark on an awesome and filled with dangers to the brim adventure, looking for the long-lost continent of Atlantis. While the puzzles are quite tough in this one, demanding sharp thinking and observational skills, they are not illogical as in many other point-and-click adventure games, so you should never really be left in a situation where you'd have to get into trial and error frenzy. Most of them are inventory-based, though some may be reliant on picking the right dialogues in conversation. A very unique at the time feature was the ability to complete the game in one of 3 different ways, aka paths that you get to follow. So, somewhere around the early mid-game you can choose one of the 3, the team path, the wits path, and the fists path. First, we'll allow Indy to take Sophia Hapgood with him, and she will provide support all throughout the adventure. Second, adds more puzzles, and always presents more complex and challenging versions of them. It's the de facto hard mode of the game. And finally, the fist path focuses on action sequences and fist fighting, which in itself is completely optional in the other 2. On top of that, there are also 3 entirely different endings, a good one and 2 bad ones. So, Fate of Atlantis, unlike most adventure games even today, offers a lot of replayability. I'm sure it was clear as I was talking about it, but since I've not said it out loud, let me make that clear here and now. Most of all, Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis is fun, and that is what's most important in games. 1992 was a big year for gaming. Many now considered classics came out and they were rightful contenders for the title of the best too. Games like Ultima 7 The Black Gate, by some considered to be the absolute best in the long-running role-playing series, Ultima Underworld The Stygian Abyss, a real-time first-person perspective full 3D dungeon crawling take on Ultima, Star Control 2 The Archon Masters, a sci-fi action role-playing in space where you have to face overwhelming alien menace. Alone in the Dark, a progenitor of a whole survivor horror genre. Wolfenstein 3D, a foreteller of the soon-to-come Doom games that launched the FPS genre into the stratosphere. And last but definitely not least, Dune 2, The Building of a Dynasty. Not really the first, but often considered to father the modern real-time strategy genre. Maniac Mansion Day of the Tentacle is a well-deserved sequel to 1987's Maniac Mansion and an excellent point-and-click adventure game. Purple Tentacle accidentally drank some of the contaminated water spilling from the odd pipes sticking out of the titular mansion, and as a result he mutated into superior in terms of dexterity, as it grew hands, and intellect Tentacle, and it now aims to take over the world. Dr. Fred, a villain from the first game, sends trio of our heroes, Bernard, Hoagie and Laverne, a day into past to prevent the incident. But since the time travel, as we all know very well today, obviously requires a use of a diamond, and Dr. Fred, being cheap as he is, substituted it with a fake. So, as a result of that, our heroes are sent into 3 different periods in time, both past and future. So our adventure takes place in the very same place, but in 3 different times. And it's up to you not only to save the world, but also eventually get all 3 characters back together in the present. Many of the puzzles are based on an interesting mechanic where you have to send objects between different time periods using the time machine to solve them. So you really have to think creatively in this one, if you're not using a walkthrough. It's also something I've not seen anywhere else. But most of the new design or mechanic ideas introduced by LucasArts' games at the time were either the first overall or genre-defining changes. Naturally, as in most games by the giant of the adventure genre, LucasArts, the humor is Day of the Tentacle's strongest suit, and while it's seemingly everywhere, behind every interaction or dialogue, it does not get in the way of incredible B-movie plot, but complements it all the way through. To summarize, Day of the Tentacle is amazing. Pause this video, waste no more time and go play it. Or don't, cause I have few more years to talk about. Anyway, few other notable games came out in 1993 too, namely Gabriel Knight, Sins of the Fathers, incredibly dark and mysterious horror point-and-click adventure, easily worth a book made about it. Doom, the game that, while definitely not the first, spawned FPS craze and a genre that for a long while was called Doom clones. Also a lot of fun, alone or in multiplayer. Syndicate, a sci-fi cyberpunkish top-down action shooter. SimCity 2000, the best city builder simulation even for many years after its release. A game worth coming back to even today. Flashback, sci-fi action platformer, famous for its ultra-smooth character animations and fun gameplay. Pirates Gold, one of my most favorite games of all time, effectively allowing you to relive the pirate dreams in fully open and historically accurate Caribbean. And finally, Mortal Kombat, brutal and bloody versus fighter that nearly single-handedly spawned the creation of a game rating system. In 1994, Doom 2 Hell on Earth was the game. The one, the only, the best. At least according to MobyGames, but it can be argued that it was a huge thing for PC gaming overall. After defeating demons on Mars, our nameless hero returns to Earth, only to find that the demon scum have already invaded it too, and they're going to town on general populace, spreading death and destruction everywhere. So it's up to him, and by extension of that you, to save humanity again. Doom 2 is basically Doom 1, but a bit better. It plays identical to its predecessor, which is good, cause by 1994 Doom's gameplay has been every Amiga and 286's user's wet dream. Millions were drooling at the screens of their more well-off friends, hoping to be able to indulge themselves in it at their own homes too. Sure, it could be argued that Doom 2 was a lazy outing, only adding one weapon in the form of an iconic super shotgun, bigger levels and more monsters, but since that was precisely what the fans of the first game wanted, Doom 2 was a gigantic success. The fact that it was pretty much modding friendly from day one extended its life and replayability near indefinitely, and numerous various themed total conversions started popping up basically within weeks from its release. Frankly speaking, believe it or not, but they do to this day. In an extremely limited manner obviously, but you get to find new levels or conversions for it even in 2020s. Quite notable among the older ones was the Mortal Kombat themed conversion, which may have not been the best of them gameplay wise, but was definitely one of the more interesting ideas Doom Engine was used for. In short, if you played first Doom or any other FPS and liked it, you'll love Doom 2. It's as fun alone as it is in multiplayer, and it's worth a playthrough from time to time even today. All that said, I feel that the first game had better soundtrack, so there's that. The best proof of how important Doom 2 was are the games that it managed to overshadow in 1994. UFO Enemy Unknown, also known as XCOM UFO Defense. An incredible strategy tactics mix portraying our last stand against invaders, and one of my most favorite games of all time. Under a Killing Moon, futuristic FMV adventure game and a benchmark for all the future FMV games. System Shock, a first-person role-playing shooter mixture in a dark sci-fi theme. Pinball Fantasies, arguably one of, if not the best, 2D pinball simulation of the time. Sid Meier's Colonization, an American colonization take on civilization. One Must Fall 2097, say one of the most innovative hidden gem fighters ever made. Theme Park, an excellent, deep and incredibly playable business simulation where you build and manage your own amusement park. Master of Magic, civilization in the medieval fantasy clothing with a bit more tactical combat. Incredible strategy gem that's sadly long forgotten. And finally, Just Jackrabbit, PC's take on a modern fast-paced action platformer. Great game. Not many know about it, but work on Dark Forces, the winner of 1995, actually began before the one on Doom did. It was delayed by LucasArts, however, because they wanted to polish the engine and add features. Features like jumping, crawling and ability to look around, to name a few. So stuff that Doom did not have. Dark Forces does not recreate the story of any of the movies, but instead features entirely original plot. You're Kyle Katarn, a former Imperial officer turned mercenary who joined the rebellion. You're initially hired to steal the plans for the Death Star, but soon discover the existence of the mysterious Dark Troopers, a new and stronger version of regular Stormtroopers. cybernetic warriors with armor and firepower to turn the tide of the war. And believe it or not, but I haven't got a single bad thing to say about this game. It's just great. The story is interesting and spans over 14 decently long and demanding missions that require both keen eye to shoot at all the bodies and ability to solve some very simple puzzles, mainly involving switches that open areas or change the level layouts. Your adventure will take you to many well-known to fans locations like Crusant or a Star Destroyer, and you'll even get to meet some of the iconic to the series characters, like everyone's favorite, Jabba the Hutt. There's plenty enough weapons and enemies throughout the adventure to keep you glued to your seat all the way to the end, but the star of the show other than the story is definitely the presentation. Amazing graphics and John Williams' original cinematic score make you feel as if you were really there, fighting alongside the rebellion. Star Wars Dark Forces is a polished and well-executed game that fans of both FPS and Star Wars will no doubt enjoy a lot. Other excellent releases for the year in no particular order were Full Throttle, LucasArts' latest point-and-click adventure with a biker as a protagonist and a huge plot to follow, MechWarrior 2, a de facto best mech game of the time, not my cup of tea but an important title nonetheless, XCOM Terror from the Deep, a sequel to earlier Enemy Unknown, where you defend the Earth from aliens in a tactical turn-based combat. This time, they come from the oceans. Who could have predicted that? Gabriel Knight, The Beast Within, a game that dethroned Under a Killing Moon as a benchmark for FMV adventure titles and is a dark horror mystery tale worth a playthrough. Warcraft 2 Tides of Darkness, a cult classic real-time strategy depicting conflict between humans and orcs, and a granddaddy of WoW. Jagged Alliance, one of the best and also most funny turn-based tactical strategy that has you leading a group of mercenaries. Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. I mean, the title says it all, right? Albion, a sci-fi role-playing taking place on an alien planet that mixes the first-person and top-down exploration with tactical combat. And finally, Worms, perhaps the best hot seat versus party side view tactical shooter out there that spawned what feels like thousands of games. "1996 is the first and only year with a sports game as a winner. Grand Prix II, while not the title I would have picked as a game of the year, is a F1 racing simulator and a worthy successor to Geoff Cramon's classic World Circuit. It features a full FIA license, meaning you get to race against the legendary drivers of the time like Michael Schumacher, Damon Hill and Mika Hakkinen to name a few. And it was the closest thing to real F1 that most players could realistically ever expect to happen to them in their lives. If that wasn't enough, the game's driving physics engine is actually surprisingly good and responds to changes you make to the car. And that's where the beauty of this game is hidden. Now, I am not a car fanatic and don't claim to be knowledgeable when it comes to tuning cars in any real way. But despite that, I can tell you that any and all modifications that you make to your car's brake bias, gear ratios, wings, sway bars, packers, springs, and even a damper can be felt when driving and impact the performance and handling in a noticeable way. And since we're on how the game feels, I can't omit the presentation. It's fantastic. Not good or great, fantastic. Sure, when compared to games of today it looks blunt and blocky, but in 1996 it was something else. I mean, take a look at the replays if you get a chance. They look so good that on a small 15-inch CRT it could be argued that the game was close to being photorealistic. Grand Prix II featured 5 difficulty options, allowing players of all skill levels to enjoy it if they were at least a little into sport. It set a new standard for F1 simulations in 1996, and it was one of the most important games in its genre throughout DOS's entire gaming history. That said, I feel like Duke Nukem 3D was a better pick for the title of the year if it was up to me, as it was fun, fast-paced sci-fi and full of memorable one-liner shooter featuring over-the-top charismatic protagonist, the Duke, so effectively you. Heroes of Might and Magic 2 The Succession Wars. Another great title mixing turn-based strategy, tactical combat, RPG progression and a fantasy medieval themes into a mixture that spawned a whole huge series of beloved games. Quake, a first truly 3D Gothic themed sci-fi person shooter, Settlers 2, arguably the best in the series Kingdom Builder / Manager, where you get to see how everything's built, brick by brick, plank by plank. It's a classic. Command & Conquer Red Alert. For a short while, a king, queen, prince and princess of all real-time strategies all rolled into one. Great game, well thought out, super fun. The Elder Scrolls Daggerfall, second of Bethesda's first-person fantasy role-playing games and the biggest gaming world in a game not set in space to this very day. Master of Orion 2 Battle at Antares, a turn-based 4X strategy in space that set the space strategy benchmark for decades to come. War never changes. And the great nuclear war that wiped most of life from the face of the Earth was no different. Brutal, devastating, but also a short one. It took but a day to lay devastation to our world, and what emerged after was a wasteland with small communities spread over large distances, split with radioactive wastes, full of dangers, raiders, and mutants of many kinds. You are an inhabitant of one of the vaults, large pre-war bunkers that were supposedly built to hold large chunks of population safe after a nuclear holocaust. Yours, Vault 13, had its water chip broken, however. A purification controller chip without which the vault has no access to clean water. You're sent into wastes to find the replacement, and you have 150 days to do so. Initially, if you play your cards right, you can double the time during one of the quest lines. Fallout is the best DOS game of 1997 and a post-apocalyptic role-playing set in a wasteland of what was once west coast of US. The game world is entirely free to explore from the get-go, and you can go anywhere you'd like. It doesn't mean that you're equipped to deal with what you find there, but you can go wherever your heart desires. The main quest is interesting and will take you through a series of hoops to complete, but it's not overly long. Fallout's depth and length comes from hundreds of side quests, big and small, that are spread out the whole game world and enhance the gameplay experience to feel more immersive. The environmental storytelling and the characters you'll meet will feel more real in Fallout than in any other game you played before. It's fun, it's depressing, it's interesting, and it's also everything in between. But most importantly, it's believable. Fallout features a very well thought out and expertly crafted turn-based combat system that uses action points as a basis for all the movement and attacks during encounters. You can attack aiming your shots or swings, depending on the weapon that you use, at various body parts of all enemies. And that choice can result in increased accuracy or critical chances. After all, head is a much more fragile of an appendix than the armies. But since we're on the combat, Fallout was built in a way that if you play your cards right and really focus on what you're doing, you can theoretically complete the whole game without ever fighting, by either avoiding or running away from encounters and solving conflicts via conversations. Provided your skills would allow for that, that is. Fallout is the first title in my most beloved series of post-apocalyptic role-playing games, and in my personal opinion, easily the best game of the year. Losers that MobyGames did not consider to be good enough to take the crown in 1997 were Oddworld Apes Odyssey, a PlayStation original puzzle game that used stealth as its main gameplay mechanic. MDK, a third-person sci-fi action shooter that took use of the new at the time hardware graphics accelerators to the fullest. Dungeon Keeper, a reverse dungeon crawler that's not an RPG or an action game, but rather strategy management mix of all things. Carmageddon. Never before has driving over pedestrians and destroying your opponents in a racer been so important, or as fun. Team Hospital, which is theme park but hospital. I know, seems vague, but it actually explains it perfectly. And Grand Theft Auto, the game that stole thousands of hours from lives of countless kids in 1997 and also snowballed the DMA into Rockstar, the unquestionable star of video game development. It's interesting to see that many of the games I would have picked for the top spots for certain years were what others did too, but in the same time some of my faves are within the losers, and games that took the cake are something I wouldn't have ever picked, like Prix II for instance. Great game, but there were so many so much better in my eyes games released that year, it's not my choice. So yeah, it was an interesting experiment. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and if you did, let me know if you'd like to see similar video for other systems too. Oh, and I apologize for how I sound, but I'm a little bit under the weather as I'm recording it. Hope you won't mind too much. If you liked the video, hit those like and subscribe buttons below. If you didn't, well then there's thumbs down there too. But I suppose you wouldn't have persevered up to this point if you really didn't. Around 60% of you are not subscribed, and there's currently no way of knowing if YouTube will decide to recommend you the next episode or not, other than subscribing and hitting that bell, that is. And when you hit that bell, whenever the new video is out, YouTube will actually send you a small and friendly notification about it, so you wouldn't miss it. If you'd like to support the channel, Patreon and YouTube memberships are a great way of doing so. They will help me release better content, and also they get first dibs on all new videos before they're publicly accessible on YouTube. If you can't or don't want to do that though, likes and subscribes are great too. I would like to take a moment here and thank all the YouTube creators from whose videos short bits were taken to serve as a background to my commentary. They're amazing and stars among the retro community. You will find names of their channels at the top of the screen when their footage is running, and also in the video description below. For me though, this is all, so have a good one and I'll see you next time. Peace.